I'm Michael Newman and I work at Summerhill School. I've worked at Summerhill School for over 20 years. I was there during the court case when the government tried to close us down. I was trained as a state school science teacher and I taught in state school science for about 3 years. The main reason why I'm here at this conference is because I think that our schools should be inspired by models of practice from the progressive libertarian type of schools. So I think that the schools around Europe and the world, which are normally created by parents or teachers or the local community, where the children have a right to take part in their school and they have a right to make decisions and they have a right to choose how they want to learn, I think that all schools should be like that. And that when small schools are set up in Spain or in Italy or in England, they should start by sharing what they're doing with the local community and especially with the local teachers and the schools and the local government, so that everyone can learn from what these new schools are like. I think it's very strange that we live in a culture and a community that claims to be democratic, that we have countries that claim to be democratic, that we have governments that claim that they're supporting human rights of their people and people around the world, and yet we do very little with children's rights, that we don't express children's rights much within our communities, and let alone our schools. Our schools seem to be a desert where it comes to children's rights. And to me, it means that everything else is false. How can I, as an adult, have rights if I, as a child, had no rights? When do I learn the culture? When do I learn the philosophy? When do I learn how my life is framed with rights? If I do not learn it at school, then in a sense I never learn it. And what happens is that we have therapeutic interventions by Amnesty International. We have therapeutic interventions by conflict resolution, by Quakers and by others who want to do peace studies and they want to do workshops and they want to go in our schools, and somehow they act as if it's different from the life of the child. We'll inject them with peace studies, we inject them with workshops on conflict resolution as if it will work. Yeah? And especially when there are issues in Europe of racism and issues to do with anti-religion and anti-different religious groups, they seem to think that we can do youth projects that will solve these. And we can do none of these. All of them will fail, all of them, until we actually address the issue of the rights of the child, so that every child has a sense of dignity and every child has a sense of being a member of a community in which they are valued, in which they are equal and in which they can have a say. And only then, I think, when we listen to our politicians, only then, once our politicians have addressed those issues, will they start really talking about human rights, and will they really then start talking about solving the problems of violence in today's society. So I think the conference like this of alternative schools and libertarian schools, I think it's so important for us to speak to people and to say, look, it isn't about a choice of a parent for what type of school their child should go to. It's about what kind of children and adults we want in our society, and what kind of justice and what kind of democracy do we want in Spain or England or France or Italy. And yeah, that's how important this debate is. You need to speak to the government, you need to speak to the politicians, and you need to tell them all schools have to be based on the rights of the child, that all schools have to be democratic, that all schools have to have the voice of the child. Not just to fight for the right for your school, not just to fight for, for your school to be protected and supported. We've got to fight for every school to be like your school. Otherwise, it's no point. Otherwise, you're part of the market. Otherwise, you don't really care about the rest of the children who aren't in your school. Innovation. In England, innovation has been hijacked by capitalism. That people want to sell, and they sell ideas, new ideas in education. And we have a unit. It was a government unit that is now freelance, called the Innovation Unit. And they sell innovation, and they sell 10 ideas to make your school better. And every single idea comes from libertarian education. Every single idea that they propose as new, as if there is no history behind it. You know, student voice, they say, oh, it's new, student voice is new. If we get the student involved in their learning, they will learn better. That's innovation. Yeah? If we get students playing and learning through play, they will learn better. If they learn outside in the environment and you take them outside, they will learn better. Yeah? And they do not state any of the history. Yeah? And yet the history of this goes back over 100 years. So over 100 years we've had teachers arguing for learning outside, learning with nature, learning through gardening, learning through play, learning through art, learning in using creativity as a way of learning. All that has been done again and again and again in state schools, in private schools, throughout the world. And it's no longer time to say it's experimental. It's no longer time to say it's innovation. It's time to say this is what they expected. The teachers in the First World War, this is what they wanted, because they thought without these ways of teaching, without giving children a liberty, a freedom within their schools, we would have another war, that our world would collapse. And our world is, in a way. If we look at our boundaries, if we look at the way our cultures are dealing with the stranger, if we look at the way human rights again and again and again are being destroyed somewhere around the world, they were right. You know, if we do not liberate our children in our schools, then we can expect again and again violation of human rights of women, of children, any group, because we are not creating that foundation necessary to build human rights. We are not creating schools that are based on the rights of the human being. We are publishing a book. We are not writing a book. We are publishing a book which is, we are republishing A.S. Neil's first book. And we are republishing it because it's 100 years old, and it's his diary as a state school teacher in a village school. And we're going to republish it with contributions from people like Ken Robinson and artists and educationalists. We're going to republish it with their comments saying how necessary it is for us to learn from what went on 100 years ago and how important it is. And it's called Dominie's Log. And Dominie's Log is, a Dominie is the Scottish word for teacher, and log means a diary. So it's the diary of A.S. Neil as he changes a state village school in Scotland, and a school where children are the children of farm labourers. So the children are poor, their parents own nothing. They live on the farms, but they don't own their houses, and the children are not going to go to university. They're going to become wives, and they're going to become farm labourers. And this teacher who takes over the school, Neil, he changes the school from a hard-working school, and at the end of the year, one of his students says to him, "My father says we learn nothing at school, and that all we do is play." And Neil thinks to himself, and he thinks, yes, fantastic, I rejoice. I have changed a hard-working school into a playground, and my children have been happy and have done what they liked for a year. Now that is during the first year of the First World War. To have a teacher who has set up a school based on children's rights at a time when Europe is at war, when there is nationalism, when women have no vote, when we seem to be at a point in our history where we are industrially destroying each other with tanks and machine guns, for such a school to exist. And the question is, why aren't they there now? Where are these schools, apart from the ones in conferences like this? This is incredible. I love events like this. This is my first time at a conference like this, but I love events like this, where you get people together who are not just enthusiastic about sort of children's liberty and rights and freedom in schools, but who are actively creating such communities and who work with children in order to help the children become human beings. So it's a glorious place. It's a glorious community. And so long as what this community has to do is show others, it's really important that we don't just stick to our schools and stick to helping our children, that we show others and we confront those who are aggressive and who are very much against what we represent, because they are the ones that are stopping our society from being just and from being democratic and from being free. Those who think that we should be authoritarian, those who think that children must do what adults tell them, those who think that children cannot learn right and wrong unless someone tells them what's right and wrong, those who think that children cannot learn unless they're forced to learn. I mean, the saddest thing in England is when I go into schools and the children are 17 and 18 and they are successful. They have their exam results. They're going to go to university. And when you talk to them about Summerhill, where I work, they think I'm a liar. They think Summerhill is hell. They think Summerhill fails and that what I tell them is a lie. Because these young, old children, these young people, believe that the child has to be controlled. They believe, because that's their education, they believe that they would not have learnt without being forced to learn. They believe that at Summerhill there would be no morality, because children have no sense of morality unless there's a priest or a head teacher or a teacher or a father or mother to tell them what is right and wrong. The idea that children can make their own decisions, the idea that children are thinking, the idea that children are moral creatures, these 17, 18-year-olds totally disagree. And they, in England, are the definition of a successful student. Yeah? And that's the kind of person we have to persuade. Yeah? And the frightening thing is when they're like that, when they're 17, 18, they're still children, according to the UN Convention, and yet they totally disagree with the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child.